Welcome to the Autism in Black podcast, where we focus on all things autism and the Black parent experience. Our goal is to always educate, support, and empower parents to advocate for not only their children, but themselves. Hello, and welcome to the Autism in Black podcast. I'm Maria Davis-Pierre, a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida and America's #1 autism advocate for Black parents. I am the founder and CEO of Autism in Black, Inc., where we aim to include the excluded. Today we have Shontaye Glover, who received her Master's of Science degree in Communication Disorders from William Paterson University in New Jersey. She is a certified speech-language pathologist and founder of Having Our Say, LLC, where her private practice focuses on evaluating and providing therapy to children with communication disorders. She produces a blog for parents and caregivers, providing resources to help enhance language development in children. In addition to her clinical work, Shontaye has presented to over 15,000 professionals on the importance of using inclusive picture books in therapy. Shontaye's commitment to promoting language development and increasing diversity in children's literature has led to the completion of her first book, Liam's First Cut, written under her pen name of Tay Jones. Shontaye weaves together the beauty of family, community, and neurodiversity as Liam, an autistic Black boy, takes us along as he prepares for his first visit to the barbershop. I am really excited at having Shontaye on today's show. She talks all things SLP and speech therapy, and I hope you enjoy today's episode. Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Autism in Black podcast. I am very excited about today's guest. We are going to be deep diving into speech and language pathology with our guest, Shontaye Glover. So happy to have you joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with you all. I'm excited about the conversation.
Yeah, so I have read your bio, but can you tell us more about yourself, who you are, what you do?
Sure. So I am Shontaye, and I have been practicing in the field of speech-language pathology for a little over 17, almost 18 years now. I primarily focus on children. So I am what you would call a pediatric speech-language pathologist. I work in public school settings, but I also have a private practice. And the private practice, the name of the practice is Having Our Say. And it actually started off as just a blog because I found myself interacting with parents and caregivers who had no idea how to help their children at home. So I just wanted to send some free resources, some tips, and share the information that we, the experts, have with families because they're part of the team as well. And then from the blog, birthed my private practice, and it's just evolved from there.
Perfect. That is, I like when businesses start off that way, just trying to get the information out to our parents who don't know the professional side of it and don't know quite what they can do at home. So I love that. And speech itself, so many people can benefit from that knowledge because, one of my twins has a speech delay. So that is very helpful to know that your blog is out there for that. So what exactly does a pediatric SLP do?
So I currently am working in schools, and my hat as a pediatric SLP there is very different than when I used to work in a hospital setting. But a SLP that works with children can work on so many different things, from a newborn that has issues with feeding and swallowing all the way up to a child that's school age that's having difficulty with information in the classroom setting. A child that's having difficulty with vocabulary, following directions. Basically, what we do is we do an assessment and see what areas of weakness exist for that child, and then we take it from there. But we work on so many things. I think people don't understand exactly what a speech-language pathologist does and don't realize that we can help in a lot of areas, including literacy, social skills, how to interact in different real life situations. cognitive, like thinking skills and problem solving skills. So the range is really huge for what a speech pathologist can do.
Yes. And, a lot of people actually only think of speech therapy or SLPs as actually just working on talking or language skills. They're not, aware of the vast array of things that you guys actually do.
I agree. I think people still think of us as speech correctionists, that someone you can go to if you have issues with a particular sound or if you want to be a better public speaker, and don't realize that there's a lot more that we can do, especially in the school setting. If your child is having difficulties there's a lot that having a SLP on the team can help assist with to make sure that they're succeeding in the academic environment as well.
I agree. My son, who gets speech therapy in school, he was getting frustrated because he couldn't express himself as he wanted to, and we couldn't understand quite what he was telling us. So there was a lot of frustration within that was leading to behavior problems and problems with him getting his work done. But once he started working with his speech therapist inside the school to be able to express himself, we saw a lot of that stuff decrease.
I think you bring up an excellent point that people don't realize a lot of frustration and even behavioral issues are related to communication. And if you think as an adult, how frustrated you would feel if you could never convey your thoughts to someone else. Children feel the same way when they feel like they're not being understood or they just can't get their point across. And being able to work on those things to help them to close that gap and improve their communication can make such an improvement in not only their academic skills, but also their self-confidence and their behavior.
I agree. Can you take us through a typical assessment within the school setting? Because I know there's a lot of frustration that comes for parents when we're going through this whole evaluation process. And it's because we don't quite understand all that goes into it. And we're left out a lot of times when it comes to assessments.
Unfortunately, parents are left out a lot. And because I'm a part of the school system and the child study team, I should be on that side of the table, but I can't help but want to help the parents as well. And I can't emphasize enough how much power parents have. And you do have the right to ask questions. You don't have to agree or sign anything that you don't understand. But to answer your question, so usually the beginning of the process is that your child has been identified. Unless you're the one initiating the process, asking the school to do an evaluation, the teacher or someone in the school setting has identified there's something that they'd like to evaluate further, and your child's been referred for an assessment. At that point, you should meet as a group and have a conversation about what the concerns are. They should also take into consideration what you see at home. And then the parent has the right to agree or decline to having the assessment done. If you agree to have the assessment done, then what happens is that the speech-language pathologist would test your child within the school setting. Now, sometimes that changes, and you may find that the evaluation will occur at your home, particularly if you're having like an outside agency do the evaluation. If your child is exposed to multiple languages and they want to have a bilingual evaluation, but they don't have a bilingual SLP in the building, you may have someone come in and do it at your home. But typically it's done within the school setting. And the evaluation, there's no blanket for the evaluation. It does vary depending on what needs to be assessed, but they should take a look at the child's face and mouth and how they're using all of their articulators. They should listen to their speech and assess how clear their speech sounds. Are there sounds that are being substituted or distorted, and take note of that. And then the language portion of the test would be taking a look at how well they understand language that's spoken to them, how well they are able to express themselves using language, and hopefully also an observation is done where the therapist or the evaluator is observing the child in a more natural setting, observing them in their classroom or observing them in normal circumstances at recess, or seeing how they play and how they interact socially with their classmates. And then all of that information is put together into the finalized report that should be sent home to the parent for their review. And then everyone will come back together again to meet and discuss and give you feedback on the assessment process.
I did not know that you could get a bilingual SLP. I know that people like to say, you shouldn't have your child doing dual language. And, that has been refuted so much time with research. So we know that, that is just a myth. But I did not know you could get an actual bilingual SLP to do your assessments.
Yes, you can and you should. If your child's native language is not English, then you would be doing a disservice to have them assessed only in English, because we're not testing how well you speak English. We're looking at how well you comprehend language. So we need to be able to assess you in multiple languages, English, because that's what you're exposed to in the school setting, as well as whatever your native language is too. And sometimes it's difficult to find a bilingual therapist for certain languages, but the effort should be taken to at least look, because you want to make sure that you have valid results that represent this child's overall linguistic abilities, not just testing how well they know English.
Wow. And are there any other cultural considerations that should be taken into consideration when doing speech evaluations?
That's a big topic now in our field, and we are, unfortunately, speech-language pathology is a field that is only 8% represented by 8% of people of color. Mm-hmm. However, our clientele is not the same. So we're talking a lot more about cultural humility and taking into consideration an individual's culture when you're working with them, not just for the assessment, but also for your intervention. So I find more and more that people are having this conversation and taking these things into consideration because, for example, for a long time, a student who spoke African American vernacular English, African American English, or what was once called even Ebonics, would be considered disordered. But we know now that that's not a disorder. It's just a dialect of standard English. So these are all things that are constantly being discussed within our field, so that across the board, regardless of your background, you are taking into consideration the culture of the client that you're working with.
Yeah, that as far as mental health, our percentages are close as well, with having about what I think it's like 4% or 2% actual clinical psychologists who are Black. So we're often in a room and getting assessments with people who are not a part of our culture. So it's good that the field is looking into being more culturally responsive, because it's needed, and it is detrimental to our children when people don't take our culture into consideration.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what kind of specialized treatment options are there for autistic children when it comes to speech therapy?
Again, there's not a specific treatment that works for every child. And I'm sure too, if you've met one child who is autistic, you've met that one child who's autistic, and everyone varies. There are people who prefer to use different modalities like prompts to help children speak better. There are people who prefer more of an ABA type approach to work with their therapy as well. So the ABA therapist and the SLP will work together. But I really think it's important that you take into consideration that individual that you're working with and the family, and try to figure out what's the best approach for that particular child. So I can't give a blanket statement in general. I think it's just best to take a look at the needs of that individual and see what works best for them.
I like that. And then also, takes into, again, consideration the culture of the family, because there's so much that may be going on within the specific family. Like you said, certain things work and certain things aren't going to work. So I love that answer.
And I think you do have to also consider that the family may need some education too. There are a lot of folks who are misinformed about autism and need to learn a lot more about what that diagnosis means. And instead of looking at it from such a negative perspective, understand what that truly entails and how you can help them. So you have to keep that component in the therapy and the intervention, I think anyway, as well, to make sure that you're working with the family.
I completely agree. Anytime I'm working with a family, that's where we start. Anytime my colleagues are working with autistic children and their families, I always say that's where you should start, especially when working with Black families, because we don't have that information that a lot of other communities get. So we are so misinformed that we don't even know quite what it means. And we also don't know that healthcare professionals' role and what they're exactly supposed to help us with, so it's always good to start with educating the family and having those types of conversations.
I agree with you. And unfortunately, the Black community does remain misinformed and underrepresented. And there's still a lot of children who are diagnosed at a later age because of that lack of information.
Yes. So can we talk about AAC devices? I'm trying to learn more about them, and I know there's a movement going on regarding AAC devices. So how do you incorporate that into the work that you do as an SLP?
So I used to work a lot more with children who needed dedicated devices because they were completely nonverbal or pre-verbal, but I don't work as closely with that group anymore, but I still find myself using AAC, and AAC stands for Alternative Augmentative Communication. And AAC can be something as simple as a visual cue, so a symbol or a photo, or it could be something more high tech like an actual device. And I think that a lot of children are missing out on the benefit of using AAC as a visual cue to help with their language because people think that that device or those pictures will take away their voice. But what in fact it does is actually give them a voice. It gives them a way to communicate. For some children, it's the bridge that helps them to talk verbally, to talk more. And for others, it just becomes their voice. It's their way that they can communicate their needs and their wants and their ideas with the world. So again, like I said, it ranges from being able to have a symbol of the things that that child likes as an incentive. So maybe we'll have a picture of a snack that they like, a toy that they like, a puzzle that they like, and that's always visible to help them as an incentive to know that if we finish this and you get to select what you want. It could be a visual schedule to help a child regulate and know that once I complete this task, this is my next step, and help them stay within their routine and know what they have to do for that day. So I use it in a lot of different ways now, not specifically just for being able to request what they need or what they want. But I think AAC should always be considered. A lot of times therapists feel like a child doesn't meet the prerequisites for AAC, but if they are breathing and thinking, then they could benefit from having those visual cues to help them express what they want and what they need, or even just to respond.
Okay. So there are an assessment that has to be done to qualify for an AAC device within speech therapy?
There are trials that you can do as a therapist when you're working with that student. You can try different techniques and see what they respond to best. So if you have a student who you feel will need a dedicated device, then yes, you absolutely should do an assessment with them. You do want to take a look at their language abilities and where they're functioning, because you don't want to pick a device that's too low, considering that they have more language skills. So you wouldn't want something that only offers them a limited vocabulary if they have more words in their vocabulary already. So you're going to assess their receptive vocabulary. You're also going to assess how do they select buttons. If they're going to be tapping buttons, that's important too. So you would want to have an occupational therapist on your team. You may need to have a physical therapist involved as well if you have a child that's not mobile and they need the device to be mounted to maybe a wheelchair per se. So that's something else to take into consideration. But yes, there are assessments, and then you can do trials during your therapy sessions to see what particular type of AAC works best for that student. And it's a matter of ruling out what doesn't work and keeping what does work, and then integrating it into the best system for that child.
Perfect. And then can parents advocate for a particular AAC device?
Maybe not a particular device, because again, the therapist should be taking into consideration, as the expert in language, what will meet their linguistic needs. But a parent should definitely have input. So if you feel that you want to be able to use this device in the community when you go out to different places and you want to make sure that your child has something that's not too cumbersome, you should definitely have input and make sure you're expressing that to the team as well. But as far as preference, like if you prefer this brand over that brand, and if you want insurance to pay for it, that may not be considered.
Okay. And then do parents get training as well on how to operate the AAC device?
In the most ideal situations, yes, they absolutely should. And if you don't, you should request it. But typically, what I've seen from my experience, even within the school system, if the school purchases a device for a child, they should also be paying for at least an hour or so of training where the parent can come into the school, or they have a special meeting set aside where the parent learns how to use the device. The goal is not for that child's device to only be used in speech therapy or only used in school in the classroom setting. You do want it to go everywhere that child goes, because it does become their voice, and we don't turn your voice off when you leave the school setting. So yes, the parent needs to know how to use it, how to program it, how to troubleshoot, all of that.
Perfect. Thank you. And I want to talk a little bit about progress now. As a clinician, when parents ask me, what progress should we be looking for? And, we get into this whole conversation. It's very specialized when I have this conversation with parents, because progress is so different based on who I'm, who's in my treatment room, who I'm speaking with. But what progress should a parent be looking for with speech therapy?
I can't echo what you're saying, what you were just saying enough. Progress will look very different for everyone, for every therapist and for every student, even for every goal. So you do want to know that they are measuring the child's progress for the goals that they are working on. And you want to see that there's an improvement. You don't want to see that they've plateaued. So for every session, I'm typically taking data on whatever our goals are. And I'm measuring how he's doing or how she's doing with those objectives. And you want to see that they are improving. It could be something as simple as being able to answering questions. Let's go with something basic like that. Comprehending basic questions, and you want to see that they're improving. Now, a parent might say, but he still can't answer me when I say, how was your day? But for the therapist, they're breaking it down into smaller increments, and they can probably show you that he's progressing and being able to answer yes and no questions, and he's progressing and being able to answer who and what and when questions. But we're going to get to the point where we can answer those how questions. We're just not there yet. So ask your therapist, how are you measuring? Are you taking data? How are you measuring the progress? And what are the steps? What are the increments for each goal that we should be looking for? And is my child making progress towards the ultimate goal, or do you feel like they've plateaued?
Perfect. You hear that, parents? Data, get the data. Mm-hmm. I stress this on every podcast episode where we talk about IEPs or school interventions and things like that. Mm-hmm. Get the data because it is very important, and it's going to be used within those next annual meeting for your IEP goals. Yeah. So make sure you're looking at the data so you can be prepared for what is going to be brought to the table in regards to your child.
Yes. And speaking of those IEP goals, make sure that those goals are changing. If they're not changing, ask why. And the answer should be because they have not met the criteria, which is based upon the data. And if they have changed, make sure that they've changed because you're moving forward and not regressing. But a lot of times parents don't read the goals. I find I'm explaining to them and letting them know your goals haven't changed for this meeting for the next year because, and I want them to know why they haven't changed or why one may have remained the same. But parents, you should read that IEP, read those goals and ask those questions, not just of your speech pathologist, but of all of your related service professionals and even the classroom teachers. If you see goals carry over year after year after year, there's a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I know for me, I asked one of my childs, I won't say which child, I asked their SLP for the data that they were taking, and they just looked at me like, what data? And that was a huge red flag for me. I was like, excuse me? So that was just like, oh my goodness, it's a whole story we'll have to say for another time, but it was just like, you're supposed to be taking data. And then they presented me with something that I could tell that they just like did within that week of me asking for the data. So yeah, you have to be on top of it.
You do. You have to be on top of it. And I don't take data every session. So I want to be clear about that too. Mm-hmm. There are times where we're working on something and I just want to see how you're progressing. And it may be more conversational, or it may just be that we're in that moment and I'm working and I'm taking it anecdotally and I'll write a narrative, but you should still have something to show for every encounter that you've worked with that child, so that you know when you're writing your progress reports and you're writing those goals, are your goals too lofty? Maybe you need to dial it back a little bit, but we need that information.
Yes. So what can a parent do to help their child with their speech goals at home?
Hopefully you are in conversation with your therapist and you know what your child is focusing on, and ask for some activities. You can either get worksheets to do at home, or you can do other things like play games. I encourage a lot of families to use board games because they work on skills in a non-structured, non-academic way, but you could still be working on those math skills, work on problem-solving skills. I like to do cooking activities because it helps the child to work on following directions. You work on sequencing skills. You can work on their ability to retell a story when you're asking them later on, like, how did we make this dish, whatever you're preparing, or maybe you're making Play-Doh or slime. And you can work on vocabulary as well. So you're working on a whole bunch of language skills without actually having them sit down and you're drilling the information. It seems more fun and they're more receptive to it. You should also try to keep in mind your routines and ask your child to help you talk about those routines. Ask them to help you gather the things you need when it's time for a bath. Kids like it when we don't know stuff and they have to be the one to help us learn or help us figure it out. So it's okay to planned ignorance. That's what I call it sometimes, and act like you don't remember what's necessary when you're setting the table and you forget to put a spoon out. Have them ask you for it. If you have a younger child that's just not using their words enough, but you feel like they understand everything. I hear that so much. My child, I know he understands everything. I feel like he's so smart, but she just won't use her words. Mm-hmm. That means that your child hasn't quite understood that using their words helps them to unlock what they need in their world. So you need to start manipulating the environment a little bit more so that they have to use their words. They have to ask if they want to get something to eat or something to drink. They have to ask for assistance to get that desired toy that's too high up on a shelf. So those are a lot of the small things that you can do to help out with your language skills at home. And then, of course, follow up with whatever home activities are sent home with your therapist.
Yes, you make a great point, because I know when our daughter was younger, we anticipated her every move. So we didn't give her the opportunity to communicate with us her needs because we were just anticipating her every move. So we had to, kind of wait for her to communicate to us what she needed and wanted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly it. A lot of times, especially with the younger children, their needs are always anticipated. And it's not even always the parents. Sometimes it's the older siblings too, because they want to be helpful. And that younger child just never gets the opportunity to practice. Everything is just done for them without them needing to use their words. So it's an honest and simple mistake that parents and families often make. But once you make that change, you'll notice that your child will start using their language a lot more.
Agreed. With my twins, as I talked about, my son has the speech delay and his sister would constantly talk for him. They were in a class together, not by choice because that was only one for them. And she was just always speaking for him. So he just let her. And when we split them, finally got them to be able to be split up, his language just burst because he had to do it himself and she wasn't there to do it for him.
Yes, that happens so often that once they realize, like, I have to use my words to get what I need, then all of a sudden you'll see it just, like you said, it dispersed and they have so much to say and so much to share. They were just not using it at the time.
Mm-hmm. So I want to talk about your book. I know you have a book out there. So can you tell us about your book, the title, what it's about, where people can get it?
Yes, absolutely. My book is called Liam's First Cut, and this is my first children's book. I decided to write a book because someone asked me. I was constantly sharing on social media different books written by Black authors and authors of color. And someone asked me, when would I be putting out my own book? And I didn't have a book at the time. I had realized that in my therapy and in my therapy room, I was often sharing books that didn't look like the children that I was working with. And I also found that a lot of the children who weren't Black didn't know how to interact with me. They would touch my skin because they had never seen someone of my skin tone before, or if I wore my hair in its naturally curly state, they might make a comment, an innocent comment from a child of, oh, your hair looks funny or your hair looks weird. But if they were to say that same thing to one of their classmates, that child won't take it as an innocent comment. That could be something that could hurt their self-confidence. So that was the reason why I started looking for more books that not only mirrored other Black and brown children, but also gave those other children the experience of seeing Black and brown children as the main characters, to normalize that there are people who are different from you and normalize different experiences. And from there came the decision to put out a book of my own. And my book is about a little boy named Liam, and he is autistic, and he's preparing for his first visit to the barbershop. And it's not a book that is, hi, my name is Liam and I have autism. It's not a book like that. Again, my point in this book was to give more visibility to Black children, especially Black children with autism and special needs, because children's literature just doesn't feature many books that have main characters that are Black, for one, let alone Black, and have autism or any type of special need. So that was my goal. And I wanted to show how our differences actually make us similar, and to normalize what it looks like.
Love that. Love that. And where can people get your book?
My book is currently available on my website, tayjones.com. My book is written by me, but I did use a pen name, Tay Jones. So you could go to my website, tayjones.com, to purchase a copy of the book. I also have the book itself, I think, is a social story. And I've seen a lot of folks write back to me and say that their children have taken the book with them when they've gone to the barbershop. It's helped to ease a lot of that anxiety when going for your first haircut. And they can relate to Liam being a little bit nervous about the sounds and what it might feel like to have those clippers as you're getting your haircut. But in addition to the book, I did also create a digital social story that you can use as a coloring book or a companion activity. And that's available on my website as well, tayjones.com.
Perfect. Love that. So as we begin to wrap up, are there any more resources out there for parents that you would recommend?
I would recommend visiting ASHA.org. That is the American Speech and Hearing Association. If you think that your child might have some delays in the areas of speech and language, there are a lot of checklists there that will help you to see where your child should be functioning and what milestones to look for based upon their age. And then there's also a way for you to look for a therapist in your area. You can put in your zip code and they will pull up where there are some certified SLPs that are close to you. I would definitely recommend looking for local groups too, for information and support groups, social groups and social outings. A lot of local communities have opportunities where parents can come together for a night that's dedicated to families who have autistic children, where there's less stimulating lights, less noise, smaller crowds. So that's another option as well. I invite all of your listeners to join me at Having Our Say and subscribe to my blog. I try to give as much information as possible across the board that parents can find user-friendly and easy to translate into things that you can do at home. And there are some links and some resources to other groups there as well.
Perfect. And what's one tip or word of advice you would give parents when it comes to speech therapy, SLPs, and all of that?
I think if you think that there may be an issue, don't wait. That's my biggest tip that I would give parents. Don't wait. It doesn't hurt to have an assessment or an evaluation done. If your child is functioning fine and there are no delays, then at least you have the peace of mind of knowing that. But if there are some areas of weakness, the earlier you can start the intervention, the better. Children make more progress when early intervention occurs. And that would be my biggest point that I would give to anyone who's mildly concerned that there may be something wrong. Don't wait.
Love that. Early intervention matters, parents. We talk about this all the time. So like Shontaye said, if you have a concern, it doesn't hurt to get an assessment.
It does not. And if you talk to your pediatrician and your pediatrician tells you not to worry, but you still feel like there's something wrong, talk to a specialist. Pediatricians have to specialize in so many things, and they may not take into consideration the nuances of language that a speech-language pathologist would. So it still doesn't hurt to ask your questions, ask for a consultation, and talk to an SLP if you have any concerns. Just don't wait.
Agreed. Love that advice. So where can people go to get in touch with you?
You can find me on Facebook and on Instagram at Having Our Say. You can visit my website, which is also havingourSay.org. And you can also visit my author site, tayjones.com. And that's where you can find information about me and my journey as an author, or to purchase a copy of Liam's First Cut.
Perfect. And we will have all of that information in our show notes as well. So you can just click on it and access it. So thank you, Shontaye, for joining us today and giving us such great information. I know my listeners are going to benefit so much from this episode.
Thank you so much, Maria. It's been my pleasure.
And thank you all for listening. And we will see you at the next episode of the podcast. If you haven't done so, make sure to subscribe to our podcast so you can always be notified when a new episode drops. To get the resources shared on today's podcast and the show notes, make sure to go to autismandblack.org/podcast. And be sure to share your takeaways from the show on IG Stories and Twitter using our official hashtag AIBpod so that we can find them and share them. And if you want to continue the conversation from today's episode, make sure to join our Autism in Black podcast Facebook community. And please make sure to answer the questions to gain entry. Thank you for listening and joining me this week. Have a good one.